Joining us now to give us their perspectives from Albany, New York, former DEA agent Michael Levine. He spent more than 25 years as an undercover operative in the organization and believes the U.S. war on drugs has failed. With us from Denver, Kevin Sabet, who served under President Obama as senior advisor at the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. Kevin is also author of the book Reefer Sanity: 7 Great Myths About Marijuana. Kevin, why don't I start with you? A lot of people really beginning to question the war on drugs. $1 trillion spent. They're locking up people every day. Doesn't seem to be making much of a dent in the drug trade. We're seeing so many people slaughtered in Mexico. Why do you still believe in this war on drugs?
Well, actually, I don't believe in that term at all, nor even the term prohibition. A war term and war analogy is a really poor way to describe something that really is a public health issue first and foremost. So let's be very clear. I actually don't hear anybody except for people in favor of legalization talking about a war on drugs. So let's be clear about our terminology. I think what you mean, though, to talk about is really the issue about whether what we're doing, prevention, treatment, enforcement, whether it works. And the bottom line is drug use is actually much lower today than it was in the late 1970s. Yes, we have new threats, but we've actually have made some progress. I mean, cocaine use is at a historic low in the last 15 years, just this past year. Production worldwide is way down. We are seeing a resurgence of prescription drug abuse, which is actually, I would argue, the fastest and the #1 drug problem today. It's killing more people every day than cocaine or heroin ever did in their heyday. It's also the #1 accidental poison death is because of prescription drugs. But let's look at that for a minute. Those drugs are legal, available, and pretty widespread. They do not offer a model, nor does alcohol or tobacco, for our current illegal drugs. That doesn't mean we should lock people up, that people need to have criminal records. I'm in favor of expungement. I'm in favor of making sure that once people serve their time, they can vote and become actually integrated members of society. So I think the way that this debate has been set up, prohibition on one hand or incarceration versus legalization/regulation, is a really poor way that unfortunately characterizes our current debate in this issue. The real answers lie with public health. They lie with treatment. They lie with early intervention.
Kevin, let me just interrupt for just a second to give Michael a chance to jump in here, because he was one of the guys, boots on the ground, so to speak. So, Michael, what's your assessment of what Kevin just said?
Well, basically, sadly, it's the same thing I've been hearing for 4 decades. Bottom line is, let's keep doing what we're doing. Einstein defined dumbness or insanity as doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And that's what we've been doing since so-called war was declared on drugs. Fact is that I wrote a book called Fight Back that was recommended by the Clinton administration, and it focused the whole force of the war on drugs, the prevention, the rehabilitation, into the hands of each community. It actually, it's in the book, we worked it, we actually showed that it was 100% effective in cutting down drug trafficking, drug crime, and all related issues, and yet it was ignored, even though recommended by the Clinton administration. And in the book, I detail how there are vested interests, big monetary interests, that rely on the continuation of a high-budget so-called war on drugs. Whatever you call it, the budget is immense, and it's the same story over and over and over. Yeah.
Right. Well, let's be very clear.
I'm a policeman.
Right.
Well, go ahead, Kevin. What were you going to say?
Well, I'm actually in agreement with what with what the interviewer was saying about the need for community investments in prevention and treatment. So that we wouldn't disagree, but I'm not arguing to do the same thing over and over again. We've never, as your interviewer just said, we've never invested in prevention the way we should. It's a crime that 10% of people who need treatment get it. We can actually do that. I'm definitely not a shill for for-profit prison industries. I think that they're an abomination, and if those are the money interests we're talking about, the other interviewer and I are on the same side. But actually, when you look at money on drug policy these days, we're on the brink of creating the new tobacco industry that's going to be called the marijuana industry. If people don't think this is about money and legalization for the big corporate interests that stand to gain with legal marijuana, we have another thing coming for us, and we're going to suffer the exact same way we've suffered with big tobacco and, frankly, the liquor lobby for the last 50 years.
Michael.
I think you're leaving out the really big interests who have monstrous budgets dependent on a war on drugs. These are people who equip police departments. When I started in the so-called war on drugs, there were 3 agencies enforcing the law. It was DEA, Customs Hard Narcotics, and in general, certain police agencies. The budget was something like 40 or 50 million dollars. Now, there is something like 53 federal and military agents. Every state has
well, that's
multiple
also because the nature of the drug problem
agents.
is, yeah, the nature of the drug problem
if you
clearly
change
has changed
philosophy,
40 years ago.
You know, for example, in one community where we got the community out there, similar to the way we attacked the John laws, we put them on the streets, drug-ridden community, all kinds of related crimes, and first thing that happened was the minute we got the community following these tactics and fight back, drug crimes, drug trafficking disappeared.
Right. There are over 6,000 community coalitions around the country, drug-free community coalitions. You can look it up. CADCA is their trade group. They actually are the ones that get the clergy,
yes, but they're depending
businesses.
They're depending on police.
No, they're not. These are prevention
They're
people. These are guys
on...
that... No, sir, I'm sorry. I think it's a bit outdated, your point of view. I hate to say it. They're not depending on police. Police is one of 12 sectors. They're actually depending on youth. They're depending on
how
prevention.
How is yesterday outdated?
No, what I'm saying is they're not depending on police.
Kevin, Michael, I think we're kind of getting in the weeds here. Let me ask Michael this question, because I know you were undercover. Talk to me about Mexico. What is the effect on the neighboring country of Mexico with illegal drugs?
Well, here's a
States?
major problem. Yeah, a major problem that we're not even talking about is that there are interests in our government that are protecting the drug flow and not telling America. I wrote deep cover about one such case. Went into Mexico. We were able to corrupt the top of the Mexican government, get them involved in a major 15-ton drug deal, and our case was sabotaged by our own Department of State, Department of Justice, because at that particular time, North American Free Trade Agreement was on the boards, and if undercover agents could tell the American public that we were being promised a wide open Mexico by the then incoming president of Mexico, Carlos Salinas de Gortari, who was also bringing in NAFTA, that it would never pass. It would just simply never pass. The book was voted one of the most censored by mainstream media books.
Right. Well, and I don't.
What can I tell you?
I don't deny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not here to defend that. I have no details of the case. My issue.
But Kevin, let me ask you about that. What about the pressures on government and what he's talking about? Politicians who run, I'm going to be tough on drugs. It's a broken system. How do you reform it, given these dynamics?
I think we need to be. Right. I think we need to be smart on drugs, not tough or soft. And again, I haven't heard that rhetoric for 15 years, tough on drugs. It's about being smart. We have proven strategies that work. And actually, I am in complete agreement with Michael in terms of what those strategies are. They're community-based strategies. When it comes to Mexico, though, what's often being touted, legalization, for example, as an answer to their problems, is ridiculous when you actually look at the deep-seated institutional issues that need to be taken care of in a country like Mexico, let alone the United States, which I think is, again, what Michael's referring to. But in Mexico, things like if you don't have a functional law enforcement, judicial, health system, education system, social service system, good luck trying to rid the community of those things. In fact, the drug trafficking organizations are not really trafficking just in drugs anymore. It's about human trafficking, it's kidnapping, it's extortion. Well, the dynamic has changed immeasurably for the last 10 years. So, by the way, I have to do my book plug here since Michael got about 3 in, is that the issue is people think it's about legalization. My recent book is coming out called Reefer Sanity, goes through the 7 great myths about marijuana, which I think have been unfortunately put out as an answer to Mexico. These are deep-seated problems that do require community.
Gentlemen, we're just about out of time. I do have to ask you, if the United States could legalize alcohol, why not marijuana? And I'll start with you, Michael. Make it quick.
I'll go back to the Bush administration, did a survey of kids who in these horrific ghettos who stayed off of all drugs, and the reason was in 90% of the cases drugs are illegal. I grew up in the South Bronx. My brother was a heroin addict. The fact that drugs were illegal kept me off drugs. I don't want to sell those kids down the river.
Kevin?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think he said it perfectly. And frankly, alcohol, unlike marijuana and other drugs, has had a long, widespread history of our culture. Trying to erase it with prohibition, over 55% of Americans regularly drink, 7% of Americans regularly smoke marijuana. And frankly, alcohol is not exactly the best example of a policy. We have 10-to-1 ratio in terms of cost to taxes. Every dollar in revenue, we spend 10 in social costs. It's not a model for anything.
Kevin, Michael, you both brought your book plugs and some heat. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.